When this is over, she'll have nothing left, right? Sophia Bennett heard her sister's voice through the cracked door and felt her entire body go still. Not from grief, not from shock, from something cold and sharp and utterly clear. She had walked into that penthouse as a fiancé carrying wedding documents. She walked out as something entirely different. A woman with a recording, a plan, and the name of the one man in this city who could make Daniel Russo pay for every lie he ever told. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel, follow every part to the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wedding binder was cream-colored with gold trim along the spine. Sophia had chosen it herself from a boutique stationery shop on Fifth Avenue, the kind of place where everything smelled like cedar and possibility. She had spent 40 minutes debating between ivory and cream, finally settling on cream because Daniel once mentioned offhandedly that ivory reminded him of old things. She had remembered that. She had always remembered everything he said. That was the kind of woman Sophia Bennett had trained herself to be: attentive, careful, devoted. The kind of woman who showed up 3 weeks before the wedding with color-coded tabs and printed guest confirmations because she believed that love was something you built with your hands, one careful detail at a time. She believed a lot of things that night. By morning, she would believe none of them. The penthouse elevator opened at the 42nd floor. The hallway was quiet, that particular quiet of expensive buildings where even sound costs money. Sophia adjusted the binder under her arm, checked her reflection briefly in the polished wall panel, and moved toward the door. She was going to surprise him. That was the plan. He had texted her that afternoon, saying he was working late, that the Meridian contract was giving him trouble, that she shouldn't wait up. She had smiled at her phone, thought about how hard he worked, and decided to bring him dinner and the venue confirmation he had been putting off signing. She was 3 steps from the door when she heard the voice. Not Daniel's. Her sister's. Amelia. Sophia's hand stopped mid-air, fingers hovering near the door handle. The voice was unmistakable. Amelia had always had that particular laugh, high and bright and slightly too loud for any room she was in. Sophia had loved that laugh once. She had defended it at family dinners when their mother said Amelia needed to learn restraint. "That's just who she is," Sophia used to say. "She feels everything fully." She understood now what Amelia felt fully. Through the gap in the door, left open, just slightly, just carelessly, the way people leave doors open when they believe they are completely alone. Sophia heard everything. 3 more weeks, Daniel said. Just 3 more weeks and it's done. Amelia's laugh again. She still has no idea. None. She's planning the centerpieces. A pause. The sound of movement. Then Amelia's voice, softer now, closer to something like tenderness. And afterward, you promise it all goes to us. Every bit of it. Daniel's voice was calm. Certain. The voice of a man who had already won a game his opponent didn't know they were playing. Once we're married, I have access to Bennett Shipping's board structure. Her father trusts me completely. It'll take maybe 6 months after the wedding to shift enough voting shares that control moves to me. Then her father is out quietly, cleanly, with a very generous retirement package so he doesn't make noise. Sophia did not move. She was aware distantly of her own breathing, slow, shallow, impossibly controlled. "And Sophia?" Amelia asked. There was a beat of silence. "Sophia will be taken care of," Daniel said. "She won't struggle financially. She just won't have any power." Amelia made a small sound, something between a laugh and a sigh. "You know she loves you." "I know," Daniel said. "That's what made this easy." There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with heat or noise, or the dramatic crash of a heartbreaking open. It arrives. Winter arrives quietly, without ceremony, settling into your bones before you realize you are cold. That was what Sophia felt standing in that hallway. Not fire. Ice. She stood there for exactly 4 seconds. She counted them later. The way you count things, you need to keep precise. And then she did something that would change everything. She reached into her coat pocket. She opened her phone. She pressed record. Her hand was completely steady. Tell me the rest, Amelia was saying inside. Tell me the part about Alexander. Daniel's voice shifted. It lost the warmth it carried when he spoke about Sophia. What replaced it was something harder. The voice of a man who had spent years sharpening himself against something larger and more dangerous than he let anyone see. Alexander is the problem, Daniel said. He's always been the problem. The man has controlled this city's underground for 30 years, and he's never once shared power with anyone in the family. Not even my father. He takes everything and gives back just enough to keep people loyal. And you want what he has. I want what's rightfully mine, Daniel said. Our family built half of what Alexander controls. My grandfather laid the foundation. Alexander just happened to be standing in the right place when the power consolidated. Amelia's voice was careful now. And Bennett Shipping helps you how? It gives me independence, Daniel said. Right now, everything I have runs through Alexander's approval. Every deal, every contract, every resource I have to go through him. But legitimate business is different. If I control a major shipping company, I have infrastructure he doesn't own. I have international connections he can't touch. I have the ability to build a rival network without him even seeing it coming. And when he finds out, by the time he finds out, Daniel said, it'll be too late. I'll have enough leverage that even Alexander Russo will have to negotiate. Another pause. Then Amelia spoke very quietly. When this is over, she'll have nothing, right? And Daniel answered cold and flat and utterly without regret. She won't even realize she was just a stepping stone. Sophia pressed stop. She stood in the hallway with the phone in her hand and the cream-colored wedding binder under her arm, and she made a decision in the space of one single breath. She did not go through the door. She did not scream. She did not cry. She turned around. She walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button for the lobby. And when the doors closed and she was alone in the mirrored box of the elevator, she looked at her own reflection and said quietly to no one but herself, "All right." That was all. Just that. All right. She did not go home. She drove instead, not anywhere specific at first, just the motion of movement, the city passing in streaks of light outside the window. Her hands were steady on the wheel. Her breathing was measured. The binder sat on the passenger seat like an accusation she was no longer afraid of. She was thinking. Not feeling, not yet. That would come later. The feeling would come in waves over the following days, crashing through at unexpected moments, while making coffee, while reading an email, while reaching for her phone to text him, before remembering. The grief would be real, and it would be significant. But grief was not useful tonight. Tonight, she needed to think. 3 years. She had given Daniel Russo 3 years of her life, her loyalty, her genuine and unconditional love, and he had spent every one of those years measuring her worth in terms of what she could give him access to. He had never loved her. He had never once looked at her and seen a person. He had seen an asset. And Amelia. Sophia pressed her lips together and did not let herself think about Amelia for more than 30 seconds, because 30 seconds was all the time she could afford to spend on a wound that deep. Her sister. The girl she had defended at every family dinner. The girl she had lent money to without asking for it back. The girl she had sat beside in the hospital when Amelia was 19 and frightened, and Sophia had held her hand through the whole night. She won't even realize she was just a stepping stone. 30 seconds, that was all. Then Sophia put her sister away in a room she would return to later and locked the door, and started thinking about Alexander Russo. She knew the name, the way everyone in certain circles knew it. Not from personal experience, but from the particular silence that fell whenever it was spoken. Alexander Russo was 61 years old. He had inherited control of the Russo family's underground network 22 years ago, under circumstances that no one discussed in polite company. He was known for 3 things: his patience, his precision, and the fact that in 30 years of operating in the most dangerous city in America, no one had ever successfully moved against him. He was also known for something else. He was known for being a man of his word. In a world built entirely on betrayal and broken promises, Alexander Russo had a reputation that was almost paradoxical. He was brutal. Yes, and he was ruthless when he needed to be, and everyone who had ever underestimated him had paid a specific and memorable price for it. But he never lied. He never broke an agreement. And he never not once had been successfully deceived by his own family, until now. Sophia pulled over on a quiet street and sat in the dark for a long moment, thinking it through. If Daniel's plan succeeded, Alexander Russo would be blindsided. The man who had survived 3 decades of his city's most violent power games would be brought down not by a rival organization, not by law enforcement, but by his own nephew, using a woman who never even knew she was a weapon. That was the thing about being used, Sophia thought. Once you knew, you could choose what to do with it. She could go to her father. She could show him the recording, explain what Daniel had planned, and let her family handle it internally. Her father would be devastated. He had trusted Daniel, implicitly had been the one who pushed for the engagement in the first place, who called it the perfect union, who looked at Daniel like the son he'd never had. That path protected her family. But it didn't protect her. Daniel would find another way in. Another angle, another leverage point, another person to use. A man who thought in systems didn't stop when one approach failed. He recalibrated. She could go to the police. But she understood well enough how far that recording would actually reach. A conversation between a man and his mistress about corporate maneuvering wasn't exactly the kind of evidence that generated immediate action. Daniel's lawyers would have it dismissed before the sun rose. There was one other option, the one that frightened her most, the one that made the most sense. She picked up her phone and started looking up everything she could find about Alexander Russo's private club. It took her 3 days to prepare. She didn't rush it. She understood with a bone-deep certainty that had settled into her during those 3 days, like something solid replacing something hollow, that this was not the kind of thing you walked into unprepared. She researched Alexander, the way she had once researched vendors for their wedding, methodically, thoroughly, without allowing emotion to distort the information. She learned everything that was publicly available: his business holdings, his legitimate interests, his history. She spoke carefully with 2 people she trusted, absolutely people who moved in the kind of circles where certain names were spoken with certain weight, and she gathered what she needed. Then she prepared her presentation. Because that was exactly what it was. A presentation. She had spent 3 years watching Daniel in business meetings, watching how powerful men in this city moved through rooms, what they valued, what they dismissed, what made them lean forward, and what made them lean back. She had been in the background for 3 years, pouring coffee and being decorative and absorbing everything. Nobody had ever bothered to ask what she noticed. That was their mistake. On the 4th day, Sophia dressed carefully. Not elaborately, she understood the difference. A woman who dressed elaborately to meet a man like Alexander Russo would signal anxiety performance effort. She dressed simply instead. Dark silk. Simple jewelry. Her hair exactly as she always wore it. She looked like herself, which was precisely the point. She arrived at his private club at 8:15 on a Wednesday evening. The club was on a block in the Westmore district that had no visible signage. You didn't find it unless you knew where it was, and you didn't know where it was unless someone who mattered had told you. The entrance was a set of black lacquered doors, flanked by 2 men who stood with the particular stillness of people trained to be invisible until they weren't. The closer of the 2 looked at her without expression. "This is a private establishment." "I know," Sophia said. "I'm here to speak with Alexander Russo. My name is Sophia Bennett. He doesn't know I'm coming." A pause. "Most people who want to speak with Mr. Russo arrange that in advance." "Most people don't have what I have," Sophia said. "Tell him I'm Daniel Russo's fiancé. Tell him I came alone. And tell him I came with evidence." She looked at the man steadily. "He'll want to see me." The man looked at her for a long moment, not aggressively, just measuring. Then he turned and went inside. She waited exactly 6 minutes. When he returned, he held the door open. "Mr. Russo will see you." The room she was brought into was nothing like what she had imagined. She had expected something dramatic. Heavy wood, dim lighting, the deliberate staging of power. What she found instead was almost quiet. A long table with clean lines. A few chairs. A bar along one wall that looked like it was rarely used. Books on a shelf that had clearly been read. Alexander Russo was standing at the window when she entered. She recognized him from the photographs she had studied, but photographs had failed to convey the particular quality of his presence in a room. He was tall, broad through the shoulders with gray at his temples, and a face that had the look of a man who had spent decades deciding things. He was not handsome in any conventional way. He was something more unsettling than handsome. He was still. The kind of still that didn't come from being calm. The kind that came from never needing to perform anything. He looked at her when she entered, and his expression gave away nothing. "Miss Bennet," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. "You've done something I find unusual." She held her ground. "What's that? You came here alone?" "Yes." "Without anyone knowing where you are?" "Yes." He watched her. "Most women in your position, engaged to a Russo, connected to the families in this city, would have come with a lawyer at minimum, or a brother, or a father." A pause. "You came alone." "I came alone," Sophia said, "because the people I would normally bring with me are either part of the problem or would make the problem worse." He was quiet for a moment. "Sit down, Miss Bennet." She sat. He sat across from her, not at the head of the table, she noticed, but directly across, which was a choice, and she filed it. "You told my associate you have evidence," he said. "I do." "Of what?" "Your nephew's plan to use my company to build leverage against you," she said. "And then to move against you before you can move against him." The room was completely silent. Alexander Russo looked at her with an expression that contained exactly nothing. "That's a significant accusation," he said. "Yes," Sophia said. "Which is why I brought proof." She placed her phone on the table between them. "The recording is 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I was standing in the hallway outside Daniel's penthouse. I want you to hear his exact words." Alexander looked at the phone. Then he looked at her. "You could have used this differently," he said. "Gone to your family, gone to your lawyers, dissolved the engagement quietly and moved on." "I could have," Sophia agreed. "Why didn't you?" She met his eyes directly. "Because Daniel isn't just betraying me. He's preparing a war against you. And I don't think you know it's coming." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, not alarm, not surprise. Something slower and more considered. "Play it," he said. She pressed play, and Alexander Russo listened. He listened to the whole 4 minutes and 17 seconds without moving, without speaking, without showing anything on his face except the kind of absolute attention that made the air in the room feel different. When Daniel's voice said, "By the time he finds out, it'll be too late," Alexander's jaw tightened once briefly and then relaxed. When the recording reached Amelia's voice asking, "When this is over, she'll have nothing left, right?" Alexander glanced at Sophia for just a fraction of a second. And when Daniel's final words filled the room, "She won't even realize she was just a stepping stone." The recording ended. Silence. Alexander sat with his hands flat on the table. He didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. "How long have you had this?" he finally said. 4 days. "And in 4 days you told no one?" "No one." He studied her. "Why did you come to me?" Sophia kept her voice even. "Because you're the only person in this situation who has both the ability and the reason to stop him. My father can be maneuvered around. Daniel has spent 3 years building that relationship. My family's lawyers work at the speed of institutions. By the time they act, Daniel will have adapted." She paused. "You don't adapt, you prevent." A long pause. "You've done your research," Alexander said. "I've had 4 days with nothing else to think about." He looked at her, not the way Daniel used to look at her, assessing her usefulness, but something different. Something she didn't have a name for yet. "What do you want from this meeting, Miss Bennet?" "An alliance," she said. His eyebrow moved barely. "You're asking me, a man you've never met, whose world is nothing like yours, for a business alliance." "I'm asking you," Sophia said, "for a partnership with the only person in this city honest enough to admit what he is." The silence that followed was different from the others. It had weight to it. Alexander Russo looked at the woman across the table from him. The woman who had walked in alone with a recording and a proposition, whose hands had not trembled once, whose voice had not wavered, whose eyes held something he had not encountered in a very long time in anyone he dealt with. Clarity, not desperation, not vengeance, just absolute crystalline clarity. "Tell me what you're proposing," he said. Sophia had prepared for this. She laid it out methodically. She had access to Bennett Shipping's internal structure, its board relationships, its upcoming contract negotiations. She could see exactly how Daniel planned to move, which meant she could show Alexander every step before Daniel took it. She was in a position to provide intelligence that no amount of outside surveillance could replicate, because she was on the inside, and Daniel still believed he had fooled her. "He doesn't know I have the recording," she said. Alexander's eyes sharpened. "He thinks you're still planning the wedding. He texted me yesterday asking about the rehearsal dinner menu." Something passed across Alexander's face. It might have been dark amusement, if amusement was something he permitted himself. "And you responded." "I said I was leaning toward sea bass." The look on Alexander's face was brief and unreadable. "You have control," he said. It wasn't quite a compliment. It was more like an observation that contained one. "I had 3 days to get control," Sophia said. "I used them." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you need in return?" "Protection for my father's company. When Daniel's plan falls apart, and it will fall apart, there will be fallout. I need to know that Bennett Shipping is secure. I need to know that whatever comes next doesn't sweep my father away with it." She paused. "And I need people to see that Daniel didn't just lose me. He lost me to something stronger than anything he could have manufactured." The words landed with a kind of quiet precision. Alexander looked at her for a long time. "You're talking about a visible alliance," he said. "Yes. You understand what that means, being connected to me publicly." "I understand it better than you think," Sophia said. "And I've decided I don't care." Another silence. The longest one yet. Then Alexander Russo did something she didn't expect. He leaned back in his chair, and he said, "You came here tonight prepared to negotiate with a man you have every reason to be afraid of." "Yes. And you're not afraid." She looked at him directly. "I was," she said. "I spent 3 years being afraid of the wrong things." He held her gaze for a moment that felt very long. Then he said, "I'll need everything you know about Daniel's contact network. Every name, every firm, every relationship he's cultivated over the past 18 months. I can have that within 48 hours. And you stay in the engagement," he said. "Nothing changes on your end. He can't know." "I know. This will not be a comfortable thing, Miss Bennett. What comes next won't be clean." "I'm aware." He nodded once. "All right," he said. And that was how Sophia Bennett, 3 weeks before her wedding, walked into the world she had always been warned away from. Not because she had no choice, because she finally had one. She drove home that night through the same streets she had driven 4 days earlier when the recording was still fresh, and the shock was still something she was forcing herself past with every breath. The difference now was hard to name. It wasn't confidence exactly. She was too realistic for confidence. What she and Alexander had agreed to was genuinely dangerous. Daniel was not a stupid man. He was careful, and he was ambitious, and he had spent years building something deliberately. One wrong move, one crack in her performance, and everything would come apart before it had time to work. But there was something else. Something she had not felt in 3 years. Or possibly she thought, and this thought arrived quietly with a kind of gentle devastation. Possibly she had never felt it at all. The feeling of being seen as she actually was, not the Sophia. Daniel wanted the compliant, adoring woman who would sign documents and shake hands and look beautiful beside him, and never ask the questions that might complicate his plans. Not the perfect oldest daughter her parents needed, the one who always did the sensible thing, who sacrificed her own ambitions to keep the peace and hold the family together. Tonight, she had walked into the most dangerous room in the city, told the truth, and been taken seriously. By a man who had no reason to take her seriously. by a man who had heard her 4-minute recording and understood not the betrayal, not the emotional weight of it, but the strategic clarity of what she was bringing him. He had looked at her and seen her mind. Not her pain, her mind. She pulled into her parking garage and sat in the car for a moment in the quiet. In 3 weeks her wedding was supposed to happen. In 3 weeks she had understood she would have signed her life over to a man who intended to strip everything from her, her company, her family's legacy, her father's authority, and leave her with nothing but the appearance of comfort. In 3 weeks instead, something very different was going to happen. She got out of the car and went upstairs. She had work to do. The next 48 hours were the most demanding of her life. She moved through her days with Daniel exactly as she always had. Answering his texts, discussing wedding logistics, smiling at the right moments, asking the right questions. She was so good at it that it frightened her slightly. Not because she was deceiving him after what she had heard, she felt no guilt about that. What frightened her was how easy it was. How much she had already been performing. How long she had been telling herself it was love when it was actually accommodation. She moved through those motions, and she watched him. Really watched him with her eyes open in a way they hadn't been, and she noticed all the things she had explained away before. The way he answered questions about his uncle with a particular careful neutrality that she now understood was managed contempt. The way he occasionally glanced at his phone when he thought she wasn't looking with an expression that was nothing like the face he showed her. The way when he kissed her cheek goodnight, there was a specific fraction of a second where something in him was elsewhere. She had seen all of it before. She had called it stress. She had called it the pressure of building a legacy. She had called it his way of carrying responsibility. She had called it anything except what it was. While she watched, she gathered. She had access to more than Daniel realized. 3 years of being present in rooms where he thought she was decorative had given her an extraordinary map of his relationships. She knew which attorneys he consulted separately from the Russo family's legal team. She knew which of his associates had been introduced to him through channels that bypassed Alexander entirely. She knew the name of the private financial firm he used for assets he hadn't disclosed. She put it all into a document. Then she had it delivered to Alexander Russo. The response came back within 4 hours. A single line on a plain card, hand-delivered by a driver she didn't recognize. "You're more dangerous than he realizes." Sophia read it once, folded it, put it in her desk drawer under the cream wedding binder, and went back to planning centerpieces. On the 6th day, Daniel came to her apartment for dinner. He was charming and warm, and told a funny story about a meeting that had gone sideways that afternoon. He poured wine and asked about her dress fitting, and said, looking at her across the table, with the particular expression she had spent 3 years believing was love, "I can't believe we're almost there." Sophia looked at him. She smiled. "I know," she said. "It feels like it came so fast." He reached across the table and took her hand. His hand was warm. It was a hand she knew she had held it through movies and across dinner tables and in hospital waiting rooms. She had once thought she knew everything about this hand. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question landed like something she wasn't prepared for, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she had to stay completely still inside while she formed it. She looked at him, at his face, at the man who had said she won't even realize she was just a stepping stone. "I'm right where I'm supposed to be," she said. It was not a lie. It was just not what he thought it meant. He smiled, squeezed her hand, told her about his plans for their honeymoon. And Sophia sat across from him and listened and smiled and noted 3 new pieces of information she hadn't had before. That night after he left, she sent them to Alexander. The work continued, and somewhere in the middle of it, in the space between performance and preparation, between grief and determination, Sophia Bennett began to understand something about herself that she hadn't known before. She was not the woman who waited to be saved. She had never been that woman. She had just been surrounded for a very long time by people who needed her to be, and she had let them. She had mistaken accommodation for love. She had called her own silence patience. She had called her own erasure grace. But here in this strange and dangerous space, she had walked herself into, carrying recordings and delivering intelligence, and sitting across from her fiancé with a steady face and a very clear agenda. She felt something she couldn't call grief or rage or even freedom. She felt herself, present, whole, pointed directly at what came next. The wedding was in 17 days, and Sophia Bennett had never in her life been more certain of exactly what she was going to do. 17 days before her wedding, Sophia Bennett was living two lives simultaneously, and she was getting very good at both of them. The one Daniel saw was exactly what he expected. A woman absorbed in final preparations, slightly stressed about catering logistics, occasionally distracted by what he assumed was pre-wedding nerves. She answered his calls on the second ring. She texted him photos of floral arrangements, asking which he preferred. She had a 40-minute conversation with his mother about table linen colors that she navigated with perfect grace. The one Alexander Russo saw was something else entirely. In 10 days, she had delivered 3 separate intelligence packages: Daniel's contact network, the name of the private financial firm, and a detailed map of the voting structure within Bennett Shipping's board that she had reconstructed from 3 years of listening carefully in rooms where she was considered furniture. She had done it methodically, without drama, without asking for reassurance that it was enough. Alexander's responses had been brief and precise. A confirmation, a follow-up question, one instruction to obtain a specific document from her father's office, if the opportunity arose naturally, and it had 3 days later when her father asked her to retrieve a contract file, and she had simply photographed the adjacent folders while she was there. She had not felt guilty about that. She had felt focused. What she had not expected was the phone call on the 11th day. It came at 7 in the morning from a number she didn't recognize, and when she answered, Alexander's voice was on the line, quieter than she'd heard it before, and carrying something underneath the quiet that she couldn't name yet. "We need to meet," he said. "Today." "Has something changed?" "Daniel met with someone last night," Alexander said. "Someone I didn't expect. She was already reaching for her coat. I can be there by 9. Come to a different location." He gave her an address she didn't recognize. "Come alone. Use a car service, not your own vehicle." She paused. "Alexander." "Yes." "How serious is this, a beat?" "Serious enough that I called you myself instead of sending someone." She hung up and stood in the center of her apartment for exactly 5 seconds. Then she moved. The address was a building in the Fordham district, older, unassuming, the kind of place that attracted no attention because it had been designed specifically to attract no attention. A man she hadn't seen before held the door. She was brought upstairs and into a room where Alexander was already waiting, standing this time, rather than sitting with 2 other men present that she didn't recognize. He looked at her when she entered, and she read his expression. Immediately, he had the look of a man who had received information he was still deciding what to do with. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He dismissed the 2 men with a look. When they were alone, he said, "Daniel met last night with a man named Victor Caruso. Does that name mean anything to you?" She thought for a moment. "He was mentioned once at a dinner about 8 months ago. Daniel introduced him as a real estate developer." "Victor Caruso," Alexander said, "is the financial intermediary for a consortium of 3 families who have been attempting to challenge my position for approximately 2 years. They've been patient about it. Strategic. They've been waiting for a weakness." She understood immediately. "And Daniel told them about his plan." "More than told them." Alexander's voice was controlled, but underneath it was something with an edge. "He's invited them in. He's offered them access to Bennett Shipping's international routes as part of the arrangement. In exchange, they provide him with capital and manpower during the transition period." Sophia sat very still. "He expanded the partnership," she said. "He's not just moving against you with my company. He has 3 families backing him." "Which changes the timeline," Alexander said, "and the stakes." She looked at him directly. "How did you find out?" "Victor Caruso is not as careful as he believes himself to be." A pause. "I've had eyes on him for 14 months." She absorbed that. "So you were already watching Caruso," she said slowly. And Daniel walked directly into your field of view. Yes. Which means Daniel is either very bold, or he doesn't know you well enough to understand how much you see. Alexander looked at her. Both, he said. He's always underestimated how much I see. He was able to do that because I allowed the family to believe I was less attentive than I am. A pause that had weight to it. A deliberate choice, for exactly this kind of situation. Sophia said nothing for a moment. She was recalibrating. She had walked into this 11 days ago believing she was offering Alexander information about a nephew's personal betrayal. What she was sitting inside now was something with much larger architecture, a surveillance operation, a multi-family power struggle, a game that had been running for years before she ever entered it. You were waiting, she said. You knew something was building. I knew the Caruso consortium was preparing to move. I didn't know my nephew was the access point they were planning to use. His voice carried something that was not quite anger. It was colder than anger. That was a gap in my information. A gap I filled. He looked at her steadily. Yes. The room was quiet. Then Sophia said, "The wedding is in 17 days. Yes. If Daniel has already brought Caruso in, the plan is further along than we thought. He may not wait for the wedding." Alexander nodded once. That's why we're meeting this morning. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me what you need. He looked at her for a moment. That particular measuring look, she had come to recognize the one that wasn't skepticism, but something more like calibration. I need to accelerate, he said. What was going to unfold over 3 weeks now needs to happen in 7 days. What does accelerating look like? It looks like making our alliance visible before Daniel expects it. He paused. There is a gathering, a private dinner hosted by the Meridian Council. Every significant family in this city attends. It happens in 6 days. She understood the moment he said it. You want to bring me? I want you beside me, he said. Publicly. In a room where Daniel will be present, before he has moved on any part of his plan. The air in the room shifted slightly. She thought about it for exactly the time it deserved. Not long, because she had already made the fundamental decision. 11 days ago, and everything since had been execution. And then she said, he'll know the moment he sees me with you. Yes? He'll be exposed in front of everyone who matters. Yes. And Caruso's consortium will understand that their access point just collapsed. In real time, Alexander said. In a room full of witnesses. She sat with that for a moment. He'll be furious, she said. Yes. He might say things, try to control the narrative. He might. Will you be able to manage that? Alexander looked at her with an expression that was very nearly something like amusement. Miss Bennett, he said. I've been managing that room for 22 years. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. All right, she said. 6 days. She went home, and she sat with the new reality for about 20 minutes, which was all the time she permitted herself. Then she called her father. Not to tell him everything, not yet, but because there was one thing she needed, and she needed it from him directly, and she needed it soon. Dad, she said when he answered, I need to talk to you about something, not about the wedding. Her father's voice shifted immediately. The small instinctive alertness of a parent who hears something in a child's voice they can't quite identify. What is it, Soph? I need you to pull the board meeting scheduled for the 23rd, she said. Postpone it, 2 weeks minimum. A pause. That's the contract ratification meeting. Daniel's been pushing to have it before. I know, she said. That's why I need you to postpone it. Silence. Sophia. His voice was careful. Is something wrong? She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. Dad, I need you to trust me. I can't explain everything right now. I will. I promise I will very soon. But I need you to postpone that meeting, and I need you to not mention it to Daniel until it's already done. Another silence. Longer. Then her father said quietly, How long have you known something was wrong? The question arrived with a weight she hadn't expected. Long enough, she said. I'm handling it. Sophia, Please, Dad, the postponement. That's the one thing I need right now. He was quiet for a long moment. Done, he said finally. I'll call the board secretary this afternoon. Thank you. You're going to tell me everything. I will, she said. I promise. She hung up and stood at the window and did not let herself think about what her father's voice had sounded like, careful and frightened, and trying not to show it, because if she thought about that, she would feel the full weight of what Daniel had been planning to do to her family, and she needed her hands steady. She needed them steady for 6 more days. Daniel called that evening. How was in a good mood, that particular bright, expansive energy he carried when things were going the way he wanted. She had noticed over 11 days of watching him properly that his good moods had a specific texture when they were about her versus when they were about something else. Tonight, it was definitely something else. Dinner tomorrow, he asked. I want to take you somewhere. Celebrate. Celebrate what? 16 days, he said. 16 days until you're officially stuck with me forever. She laughed. She was remarkably good at the laugh now. Where are you thinking? He named a restaurant, one of the expensive visible ones on the east side that powerful people went to when they wanted to be seen being successful. Sounds perfect, she said. I'll pick you up at 7. I'll be ready. She hung up the phone, and then she sent a message to Alexander. Daniel wants dinner tomorrow at Castellan, East Side. He's in an elevated mood. I think Caruso's arrangement is advancing faster than the 7-day timeline. The response came back within 4 minutes. Noted. Wear something they'll remember. She read that twice. Then she went to her closet. The dinner was an education. Daniel was charming and generous and ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's weekly salary and told stories about his family's history with the kind of casual pride that she now recognized as a performance of legacy. He talked about his grandfather, about the network his uncle had built, about the future of the Russo name. He talked about Alexander with the practiced neutrality of a man hiding contempt behind respect. He's not as sharp as he used to be, Daniel said casually, refilling her glass. Age does that. He's still formidable, obviously. But the world has changed around him, and he hasn't kept up. The new generation of operators, they move differently, faster, more integrated. Sophia swirled her wine. You respect him, though, she said. Of course I respect him, Daniel said smoothly. He built something real. I just think it's time for a new architecture. She looked at him across the table. This man who had said she would never realize she was a stepping stone. I think you're right, she said. New architecture is always more interesting than what came before. He smiled at her. He had no idea. Under the table, her phone screen stayed dark. She was memorizing every word. 4 days before the Meridian dinner, something happened that Sophia hadn't anticipated. Amelia called. She almost didn't answer. She sat and watched her sister's name on the screen for 3 full rings, feeling the locked door inside her, the one she had shut on the second night, the one that held everything she wasn't ready to face yet rattle in its frame. She answered on the 4th ring. Sophia. Amelia's voice was careful, slightly too careful. Amelia. A pause. I just wanted to check in. You've been quiet. I've been busy. Wedding preparations. Right. Another pause. How is everything? Sophia looked at the ceiling. Her sister, who had sat with her through nights she didn't want to remember, who had borrowed money without asking for it back, who had looked at her fiancé and decided at some point that Sophia would probably never fully know the details of that Daniel was worth more than she was. Everything is fine, Sophia said. How are you? Good, fine. Amelia hesitated. I was thinking, I know the wedding is coming up and I know we haven't talked as much lately, and I just wanted you to know that I'm happy for you, Sophia. I hope you know that. The words landed in a strange way. Not painful exactly, more like touching a bruise you'd forgotten was there. Thank you, Amelia, she said. I mean it. I know. Another pause. Are you sure everything's all right? Amelia asked. I sound like someone who has a wedding in 2 weeks, Sophia said pleasantly. I'm fine. I'll talk to you soon." She ended the call and sat for a long moment with the phone in her hand. Her sister had called to check on her. The interpretation of that could go several directions. Maybe Amelia was feeling genuine guilt, some residual loyalty, pushing through whatever she had decided to feel about what she was doing. Maybe Daniel had mentioned something that made her anxious. Maybe she simply missed her sister and couldn't reconcile that with the choice she'd made, and had called because humans were complicated and rarely able to live cleanly inside their worst decisions. Or maybe she was checking for cracks. Sophia set the phone down. She would figure out Amelia later. There was a dinner in 4 days. She met with Alexander once more before the Meridian gathering. The day before, briefly, in the same location he'd used for their second meeting. Hai went through the parameters with the efficiency of a man who had orchestrated things like this before and didn't waste time on unnecessary preparation. Who would be in the room? Where Daniel would be positioned? How the moment of their arrival would land? What she needed to do and what she absolutely did not need to do. "You don't need to perform anything," he said. "You don't need to make a speech. You don't need to confront him. Simply walking in beside me will be sufficient." She nodded. "When he approaches you, and he will approach you." "I let you handle it," she said. "No," Alexander said, and she looked at him slightly surprised. "When he approaches you, you handle it. Calmly. Briefly. I am there if the situation escalates, but the first response is yours." He paused. "Because you are not someone who needs to be handled. You are someone who handles things." She looked at him. In 11 days of working with this man, she had received a lot of information and very little in the way of anything personal. He was not warm, she had never expected him to be. He was precise and direct, and entirely without the kind of flattery that men like Daniel deployed constantly, the low-level performance of affection that she now recognized had been functioning all along as a kind of management. Alexander didn't manage her. He spoke to her like someone who expected her to be capable. It was, she realized, one of the more extraordinary experiences of her adult life. "All right," she said. "There's one more thing," he said. "What?" He looked at her steadily. "After tomorrow night, your life changes. Not just Daniel, everything. The way people in this city see you, the conversations you're included in and excluded from, the relationships that shift. I want to make sure you've thought about that." She held his gaze. "I've thought about nothing else for 16 days, she said. He nodded once. "Good." She stood to leave. "Alexander." He looked at her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question had been forming for days, and she had finally decided to ask it directly, the way he asked everything. "You have enough information to stop Daniel without me. You don't need me at the dinner. You could handle this entirely without the public alliance. Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was the same as always, measured without performance. "Because what Daniel did to you deserves to be undone publicly," he said. "He used you as an invisible piece in a game he believed you couldn't see. The appropriate response to that is making you the most visible person in the room." A pause. "He should have to watch that." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 3 years of being in the background. 3 years of pouring coffee and being decorative and absorbing information that nobody thought she was gathering. She thought about the woman in the hallway with the wedding binder. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. She left. The night before the dinner, Sophia did not sleep. Not from anxiety, though. Anxiety was present. She would have been a fool to pretend otherwise. It was something else. A kind of alertness that felt necessary, like the body's way of marking a threshold. She lay in the dark and let herself feel for the first time since the hallway the full weight of what the last 16 days had been. She had found her fiancé with her sister. She had stood in a hallway and recorded it instead of falling apart. She had walked into the most dangerous room in the city and made a proposition. She had spent 2 weeks maintaining a performance so complete that Daniel Russo, a man who built his entire life on reading. People had texted her that morning asking if she preferred roses or lilies for the ceremony. She had answered roses. She had written that text while sitting in a meeting with Alexander Russo's intelligence team, going over the Meridian dinner logistics. She lay in the dark, and she let herself feel all of it. The grief which was still real, even if it had company now. The fear which was honest and earned. The strange and complicated thing she had not yet found a word for, that lived in the space between all of it. She thought about Alexander's words. He should have to watch that. Not said with cruelty. Said with something she was beginning to understand, was his particular form of principle. The conviction that things should be made right, not just privately and efficiently, but visibly, so that the record was correct. She thought about that for a long time. Then she got up, went to her desk, and spent the next 2 hours preparing for everything that might go wrong tomorrow night. She was her father's daughter. She prepared. The Meridian dinner was held in a building she'd been to once before a charity event 18 months ago with Daniel. She remembered the room as full of people who wore power, the way other people wore good shoes, naturally, without calling attention to it. She arrived with Alexander at 8:45, which was deliberately not first and deliberately not last. She had worn dark blue. Alexander's suggestion, framed as an observation. Blue reads as authority without aggression. She had taken that note and built everything else around it. Simple, exact, memorable. They walked in together. She had prepared herself for the moment, had told herself she was ready for the heads that would turn, the conversations that would pause, the particular silence that moves through a room when something unexpected enters it. She had underestimated it. The silence moved like a wave, starting at the entrance and rolling through the entire room in about 4 seconds flat. She felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure. Not threatening, just total. Every eye in the room was on them. She kept her shoulders back and her face calm, and she moved beside Alexander as if this were the most natural thing in the world, which was something she had rehearsed internally for 24 hours, and which by some combination of discipline and genuine settled certainty actually felt almost true. She did not look for Daniel. She let him find her. It took less than 3 minutes. He came across the room with the particular controlled speed walk of a man who was furious and not allowing himself to show it, moving fast enough to reach her quickly, slow enough to maintain the appearance of ease. She clocked him in her peripheral vision when he was still 12 feet away. She turned and looked at him directly when he was 6. His face was doing something complicated. He looked at her. He looked at Alexander. He looked at her again. Sophia. His voice was very, very even. I didn't know you were coming tonight. Last-minute invitation, she said pleasantly. His eyes moved to Alexander. Uncle. The word came out like something he'd had to pull from somewhere. I didn't expect to see you here with my guest, Alexander said. His voice was completely comfortable. Why wouldn't I bring a guest, Daniel? Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You two know each other. We've been acquainted for a few weeks now, Sophia said. It's been a very productive relationship. Something moved behind Daniel's eyes. The pieces were assembling themselves in real time. She could watch it happening, the way the information was arriving and being processed and generating something that was part calculation and part an emotion he was working hard to keep below the surface. Is that right? He said. Not a question. It is, Alexander said. He looked at his nephew with the patient, absolute stillness of a man who had been 10 steps ahead for months and had decided tonight to stop pretending otherwise. We have quite a bit to talk about, Daniel, but this isn't the moment for it. He glanced briefly at the room, at the watching faces, the paused conversations. Enjoy the evening. And he turned slightly, directing Sophia toward the far side of the room. She walked beside him. She did not look back. But she heard behind her, in the particular silence they left in their wake, the sound of Daniel Russo understanding that the game had changed, that the woman he had called a stepping stone had walked into the room beside the man he feared most, and every person in that room had seen it. That sound was not loud. It didn't need to be. The next 2 hours were the strangest of her life. She stood in a room full of people who were rapidly recalibrating everything they thought they knew about her. She could see it happening in real time, in the way conversations adjusted when she approached, in the way people who had always looked slightly past her suddenly looked directly at her, in the careful way that men and women who lived and breathed political calculation tried to understand what they were seeing. Several people spoke to her with the kind of attention she recognized as respect rather than courtesy. One woman, Helen Farrow, who ran the city's largest private foundation, and whom Sophia had sat near at dinners for 2 years, without receiving more than polite small talk, stopped her near the center of the room and said directly, "I've wanted to have a real conversation with you for some time. I always suspected there was more happening behind those eyes than you were letting on." Sophia looked at her. "There was," she said simply. Helen laughed a real laugh, surprised. "Come see me next week. I have a project I'd like your perspective on." She filed that away. Daniel circled the room twice. She tracked him without appearing to something she had gotten very good at. He spoke to several people with forced normalcy, laughed at something that didn't quite reach his eyes, checked his phone twice in a way that was fractionally too deliberate. Caruso was in the room. She spotted him on the second pass, a stocky man in his early 60s near the bar, watching the room with the flat attention of someone assessing damage. He looked at Alexander twice. He looked at Sophia once briefly, and then looked away with the expression of a man revising a plan. She committed his face to memory. At 10:30, Daniel found her again without Alexander present, which was, she understood, not an accident. He had waited for a moment when she was briefly alone near the edge of the room. He came beside her. His voice when he spoke was very quiet, and underneath the quiet was something she hadn't heard from him before: fear. "What are you doing?" he said. "Sophia, what is this?" She looked at him calmly. "I'm attending a dinner. With my uncle." His voice cracked slightly at the edges. "You went to Alexander. You—" He stopped, pulled himself back. "What have you told him?" She tilted her head slightly. "Everything I know," she said. He stared at her. "You don't know what you've done," he said. "You have no idea what you've—" "Daniel." Her voice was quiet and completely steady. "I know exactly what I've done." She looked at him. This man she had loved for 3 years. This man who had counted on her love, like a balance he could spend without consequence, and she felt the grief for a single sharp moment, real and clean, and then contained. "You should talk to your uncle," she said. "Tonight, before this goes further." He stared at her. "You came into my world," he said. "You have no idea how dangerous." "I came into your uncle's world," she said. "At his invitation. With information you didn't know I had, because you didn't think I was paying attention." She paused. "That was your mistake, Daniel, not the plan, the assumption." He looked at her for a long moment. And then Alexander was there, not dramatically, just present the way he moved through rooms, as if he simply existed, wherever was most relevant. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I think you and I should find a few minutes." Daniel looked at his uncle, then at Sophia. His face had the expression of a man understanding for the first time that the story he'd been telling himself about how this would go was not the story he was actually in. He straightened, nodded once, and followed his uncle without another word. Sophia stood alone for a moment in the hum of the room. She breathed. She looked out over the gathered faces, the powerful and the careful and the calculating. All of them recalibrating, all of them updating their models of who she was and what she represented. She felt something move through her. Not triumph. That wasn't the right word. Something quieter. Something that felt like arriving somewhere she was always supposed to reach. She reached for a glass from a passing tray. She was not done yet. But tonight had been exactly what it needed to be. She drove home from the Meridian dinner alone, and the silence in the car felt different from any silence she had sat inside over the past 16 days. It wasn't the silence of grief, or of preparation, or of the careful, controlled blankness she had been maintaining like a second skin through every dinner and phone call and text message exchange with Daniel. It was something else. The silence of a thing set in motion that could no longer be stopped. The silence of a door that had closed behind her so completely that she could not have gone back through it even if she wanted to. She did not want to. She parked and sat for a moment before going upstairs, and she thought about Daniel's face when Alexander had appeared beside her. The specific quality of that expression, the calculation, dropping away, just for a fraction of a second, and underneath it, something raw and genuine. Not love, not remorse. Something closer to the shock of a man who had built an elaborate structure and walked in one morning to find the foundation gone. She thought about what Alexander and Daniel had said to each other in the 30 minutes after she had watched Daniel follow his uncle away from her. She didn't know yet. Alexander had said nothing to her before she left a brief exchange near the entrance, his eyes steady, his voice even. "Go home. I'll contact you tomorrow morning." And she had gone, because she had learned over 16 days that Alexander Russo did not say things he didn't mean, and when he said tomorrow morning, he meant it precisely. She went upstairs. She washed off the evening. She sat at her desk and wrote down everything she had observed Caruso's position in the room. The names of 3 people she had seen Daniel speak to in the first hour, the exact words of the exchange when Daniel had come to her. She was meticulous about it. She had learned over the past weeks that memory was unreliable under pressure and documentation was not. Then she went to bed. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she expected. Alexander called at 7:15. "How are you?" he said. Not quite a question, more like a check, the kind a person makes when they want a real answer, rather than a social one. "Clear," she said. "Tell me what happened." A pause. "Daniel and I spoke for approximately 40 minutes. And he denied everything initially," Alexander said, "which I expected. Then I played him a portion of the recording, just enough to establish that I had heard his exact words." Sophia sat forward slightly. "How did he respond?" "He pivoted," Alexander said. "He's not a man who collapses when cornered. He immediately moved to a negotiating posture, tried to reframe what he'd said as frustration rather than planning, claimed the conversation with Caruso was exploratory rather than operational. He's buying time. Yes, he's buying time and assessing how much I know." A brief pause. "He also asked about you." She felt something tighten in her chest. "What did he ask?" "He asked how long we had been in contact," Alexander said. "He asked what you had given me, and then he asked—" Another pause, briefer. "He asked whether what existed between us was personal." The room was very quiet. "What did you tell him?" Sophia asked. "I told him," Alexander said, "that what existed between you and me was none of his concern, and that his primary concern right now should be how he intended to make this right." She absorbed that. "He's not going to make it right," she said. "He doesn't know how to make things right. He knows how to make things work for him." "I know," Alexander said, "which is why this next week matters considerably." "What happens this week?" "Daniel has 72 hours, Alexander said. "I gave him a specific set of requirements, a formal withdrawal from any arrangement with the Caruso Consortium, a full disclosure of every contact he's made on behalf of that operation, and a documented relinquishment of any claim to involvement in Bennett Shipping's board structure. And if he doesn't comply—" The pause that followed was brief and said everything. "Then I stop managing this quietly," Alexander said. Sophia understood what that meant. She didn't ask him to elaborate. "There's something else," Alexander said. "Something I need to tell you before you hear it from another source." She braced slightly. "Go ahead." "Daniel called your sister last night, after the dinner." The locked door rattled. "How long did they talk?" 47 minutes. She closed her eyes for 1 second. "Do you know what was said?" "Not specifically, but I know that at 9 this morning, Amelia Bennett made a phone call to your father's office." Sophia was on her feet before she realized she had stood up. "She's going to my father." It's possible she's trying to get ahead of it, manage his reaction to what he's about to learn, shape the version he hears first. "She's protecting Daniel," Sophia said. The grief moved through her fast and hot, and she let it because there wasn't time to lock it away this time. "She's still protecting him." "Sophia." Alexander's voice was steady. "Your father needs to hear the full truth from you, today, before anyone else reaches him." She was already reaching for her coat. "I'll call you when I'm done," she said. She was at her father's office in 35 minutes. His assistant, a woman named Miriam, who had worked for her father for 15 years, and who looked at Sophia with the particular expression of someone who had already fielded a difficult phone call that morning, waved her through immediately. Her father was standing when she came in. George Bennett was 64 years old and had the build of a man who had spent his life doing physical work before he built a company large enough that physical work became optional, broad through the chest, careful in his movements with eyes that had always seen further than he let on. He looked at his daughter when she came through the door, and she saw immediately that Amelia had reached him first. His face was carrying something complicated. "Sit down, Soph," he said. "I'd rather stand." He studied her. "Your sister called me." "I know. She said you'd done something, gone to someone, that you were making a terrible mistake." He paused. She was crying. Sophia looked at her father steadily. "Dad, I need you to let me talk before you respond. All the way through. Can you do that?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down behind his desk and folded his hands. "Talk," he said. She talked. She told him everything from the hallway on the 42nd floor, to the recording, to the 4 days of preparation, to the meeting with Alexander. She told him about the intelligence she had gathered about the Caruso Consortium, about the board meeting she had asked him to postpone, and why. She told him about the Meridian dinner, about Daniel's face when he'd seen her walk in beside Alexander, about the 47-minute phone call Daniel had made to Amelia the same night. She laid it out methodically, the way she had prepared it, complete in sequence, without editorializing beyond what was necessary to make it clear. She placed her phone on his desk. "The recording is still on here," she said. "You can listen if you want to. I'll leave the room." Her father had not moved during the entirety of what she said. He sat with his hands folded and his face very still, and she could see behind the stillness the specific pain of a man receiving information that was dismantling something he had built in his mind over 3 years. He looked at the phone. He looked at her. "He was going to take the company," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Yes." "He was going to push me out." "Yes," quietly, with a retirement package, so you wouldn't make noise. Her father was silent for a long moment. And Amelia knew. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," Sophia said. He unfolded his hands, set them flat on the desk. "How long have you been sitting with this?" he asked. 18 days, she said. He looked at her. 18 days, he repeated. Alone. Not entirely alone. Once I went to Alexander. At the name. Her father's expression moved in a complicated direction. Not quite alarm, not quite disapproval. Something more layered than either. "Alexander Russo," he said. "Yes." "Sophia." He leaned forward. "I understand why I hear the logic of it, I do. But that man's world, his world," Sophia said, "is the reason Daniel's plan is already falling apart. Alexander has given him 72 hours to formally withdraw from the Caruso arrangement and disclose everything. If he doesn't comply, Alexander stops managing it quietly. And what does that mean for us, for the company? It means we're protected," she said. "That was the condition of the alliance. Bennett Shipping is secure. The postponed board meeting stays postponed until this is fully resolved. Daniel loses every angle he built." Her father sat back. He looked at his daughter. Really looked at her with the expression of a man seeing something he should have recognized earlier and wasn't sure how he'd missed it. "When did you become this?" he said quietly. She felt something move in her chest. "I think I always was," she said. "I just didn't have a reason to be visible about it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, came around the desk, and put his arms around her. She let him. For exactly the time it took her to feel the thing she'd been holding for 18 days press against the inside of her ribs. Then she straightened. "I need you to do something," she said. "Name it. Amelia is going to try to manage your reaction. She'll frame what she did as a mistake rather than a choice. She'll cry. She's good at crying." Her father's jaw tightened. "I know my daughters," he said. "I know you do," Sophia said. "I just need you to not let her redirect you before you've had time to think clearly." He nodded once. "And Daniel," he said. Daniel is Alexander's problem right now, she said. Which is the safest place for him to be. For us. Her father looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" "Hold the board meeting postponement," she said. "Don't take any calls from Daniel for the next 72 hours. And if he shows up here in person, call me before you let him in." "Done," he said. She picked up her phone from his desk. "I'll explain the rest when there's more to explain," she said. "I promise." "I know you will," he said. He paused. "Sophia, I'm sorry I didn't see it." She looked at him. "You trusted someone you thought deserved it," she said. "That's not a failure. That's just being human." She left. The 72 hours that followed were the tightest of everything that had come before. Daniel did not comply. She knew it before Alexander told her she knew it because on the second day, Daniel called her. She let it ring through to voicemail the first time. The second time she answered. His voice had a different quality now. The warmth was still present, he was skilled enough to maintain that, but underneath it, something had shifted. He had spent 2 days recalculating, and what he had concluded was that there might still be a version of this where he came out ahead. She could hear the calculation in every word he chose. "Sophia," he said, "I need to see you, in person. I need to explain." "Explain what?" A pause. "Everything. What you heard, it wasn't what you think." "I have a recording, Daniel. I know." He exhaled. "I know you do. I'm not saying the words weren't said. I'm saying the context." "The context," she repeated. "I was frustrated. With Alexander, with the situation, with feeling like I'd spent my whole career in his shadow. I was venting to someone I thought I could trust. Some of what I said was anger talking." She said nothing. "Sophia." His voice dropped. "I love you. What I said about you, I know how it sounded. But it was said in a moment I'm not proud of, and it doesn't reflect how I actually feel." She sat with the phone against her ear and felt something she hadn't expected. Not softening. Not even pain exactly. More like grief for what he was. Because he was doing what he always did. He was finding the angle. He had decided that the emotional angle was still viable, that she was at her core, a woman who could be reached by the right words, said in the right way, that the love she had felt for 3 years could be leveraged one more time. He still thought that. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Stop." A silence. "You don't love me," she said. "You have never loved me. You loved what I represented to you and what I gave you access to. And I know that now, not because Alexander told me, and not because I've convinced myself of it as some kind of coping mechanism. I know it because I heard you say it in your own words to my sister." She paused. "And because of what you're doing right now." "Sophia, a man who loved me," she said, "would not in this moment be calculating which version of this conversation might still bring me back. He would be devastated. He would be asking for forgiveness without expectation. He would not be presenting a case." Silence. "You're presenting a case," she said. "And I want you to hear me clearly when I tell you that there is no case. This is done. Call Alexander and comply with what he asked you to do. Because if you don't, the next 3 days will be considerably worse than the last 2. She ended the call. Her hands were steady. She sat for a moment and thought about the fact that she felt no satisfaction in it. None of the release that people talked about, the catharsis of the decisive word. She just felt clear. Clean. Like a room that had been emptied of things that were never supposed to be in it. She sent Alexander a message. He called. He's not going to comply. The response came back quickly. "I know. He contacted Caruso this morning. He's accelerating." Her stomach dropped. She typed, "How quickly?" "He's meeting Caruso's legal team tomorrow. He's trying to formalize the arrangement before I can dismantle it." She thought fast. "What do you need?" "The document from your father's office, the board voting structure. I need the most current version." She was already typing to her father before she finished reading the message. What happened next moved at a speed that was genuinely hard to track in real time, and only became comprehensible afterward when she could lay it out in sequence. Her father provided the document within 2 hours. Alexander's legal team had it analyzed within 3. At 9 the following morning, 36 hours before Daniel's deadline officially expired, Alexander made a phone call to Victor Caruso that Sophia was not present for but heard about afterward in enough detail to understand its content. He told Caruso very precisely the full extent of what Daniel had disclosed in their 40-minute conversation at the Meridian dinner, including specific details about the consortium's internal structure that Caruso did not know Daniel had shared, which Daniel had not shared, which Alexander had obtained from the 14 months of surveillance that had already been running before Sophia ever walked into his club. The effect was immediate. Caruso concluded that Daniel was not only unreliable, but actively dangerous, a man who had already been talking to his uncle, even while building an arrangement against him. By 10 that morning, the Caruso consortium withdrew. She found out when Alexander called her. "It's done," he said. She sat down. Caruso pulled out. Yes, he believes Daniel burned him. Which is not entirely inaccurate. Daniel did provide information that I was able to use, even if not in the way Caruso imagines. She absorbed that. So Daniel has no backing. He has no financial backing, no operational support, and his plan to access Bennett Shipping's board structure has been effectively foreclosed by the document your father provided. He is standing alone with an agenda he no longer has the resources to execute. She let herself feel that for a moment. "What does he do now?" she said. "He has 2 choices," Alexander said. "He complies with what I asked, or he escalates without the ability to do so effectively." "He'll escalate," she said. "He doesn't know how to stand down." "No," Alexander agreed. "He doesn't." "What does that look like?" "It looks like the next 24 hours being uncomfortable," Alexander said. "He will attempt to create a version of events that is favorable to himself. He will talk to people. He will frame you as having gone to me out of jealousy or instability. He will attempt to establish a narrative before the true one is established." "Then we need to establish the true one first," she said. "Yes." She thought for a moment. "The recording." "Yes." "You have a copy." "I have a copy," Alexander confirmed. "There are people in this city," she said slowly, "who had drinks thrown in their faces and scandals manufactured against them and businesses dismantled because of men like Daniel who controlled the narrative before anyone else could speak. Powerful men who knew which story got told first wins." She paused. "We need to tell it first." "I agree," he said. "I've been thinking about the vehicle. There's a gathering." She said it had come to her while she was thinking a dinner her father had mentioned 2 weeks ago that she had filed without realizing she was filing it. The Ellis Foundation benefit, Thursday night. Half the city's business community will be there. A pause. "That's 3 days," Alexander said. 3 days, she confirmed. "You're proposing we make this public at the benefit." "I'm proposing," she said, "that we let Daniel make it public for us." Silence. "Explain," he said. "He's going to talk in the next 3 days," she said. "He's going to start building his version. And when he walks into that room Thursday night and sees us there together again, in an even more visible context, he is going to do what men like Daniel always do when they feel cornered and they've already decided they have nothing left to lose. He'll confront you directly," Alexander said. "In front of everyone," she said. "And when he does, the recording becomes necessary rather than strategic." "Exactly." Another silence. Longer. "You're baiting him," Alexander said. There was something in his voice she couldn't entirely read. "I'm creating conditions where the truth comes out because he can't stop himself from reacting," she said. "He doesn't believe I'm capable of this. That's why it will work." The silence extended. Then Alexander said, "You understand he may not be predictable. He may surprise you." "He might," she said. "But he won't. I've spent 3 years learning how he operates under pressure. He performs best when he's in control. When he loses control, he attacks. He'll attack in that room." "And if I'm wrong," she said, preempting him. "Then we find another vehicle," he said simply. "But you're not wrong in those words, not warmth exactly, but weight. The specific weight of being believed by someone who was not easy to convince. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he confirmed. The 3 days before the Ellis Foundation benefit were the most psychologically demanding she had faced, not because of Daniel. Although Daniel's activity in those 72 hours was exactly what she had predicted. He spoke to people. He had lunch with 2 men who were close to her father's business circle. He attended a cocktail party where he spent by her count, based on who reported back to her through channels she had carefully established, approximately 4 separate conversations, positioning himself as a man whose fiancé had been manipulated by his dangerous uncle. He told a story about a naive woman caught up in Alexander Russo's orbit. He told it with conviction. He told it to exactly the wrong people, because Alexander had spent 22 years building a city's worth of relationships, and several of the people Daniel spoke to were people who had, with considerable subtlety, already been made aware of certain relevant facts. What Daniel was building, he was building on sand. He didn't know it yet. But the hardest part wasn't tracking Daniel. The hardest part was Amelia. Her sister called twice. She did not answer. On the second call, Amelia left a voicemail that Sophia listened to once and then set down like something that required careful handling. Amelia's voice in this message was not the careful voice of the phone call 9 days ago. It was something rawer. She had been crying recently before recording it. Sophia could hear the specific quality of recently cried breath in her voice. "Sophia, I know you're not going to pick up," Amelia said. "I know you probably hate me right now. And I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything. But I need you to know, I need you to hear this. Even if you never respond, I knew it was wrong. I knew it the whole time. From the very beginning, I knew what Daniel was doing to you wasn't right. And I told myself so many things. That you'd be okay. That it wasn't really going to go the way he said. That somehow it would work out." A pause, wet and difficult. "I was in love with him. And I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway, and I am going to have to live with that. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I never stopped being your sister, even when I was being the worst version of myself." Another pause. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know." The message ended. Sophia sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. The locked door. She had known since the night of the hallway that this door could not stay locked forever. She was not a woman who could carry an unprocessed wound. Indefinitely, she was too pragmatic for that, too oriented toward resolution. The door would need to open eventually. But not tonight. Not with 3 days left and a benefit to survive, and everything still in motion. She set the phone face down on the desk. She picked up her notes. She worked until midnight. The night before the benefit, Alexander asked to meet briefly. He was already in the room when she arrived, standing, which she had noticed was his default, the posture of a man who was always prepared to move. He looked at her carefully when she came in. "How are you?" he asked. "Ready," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. Over the past 22 days, and she had somewhere in the last week stopped counting from the hallway and started counting from the night she walked into his club. She had come to understand Alexander Russo in ways she had not expected. He was not the man the city's mythology had built. The mythology was not wrong exactly. He was dangerous and he was powerful, and there was a quality to his authority that was not negotiable. But the mythology left out something that she had come to see clearly. I was scrupulously honest. Not kind exactly, or not kind in the conventional performed way, but honest in a way that was so consistent, it had almost become its own form of care. He did not tell her things she wanted to hear. He did not soften assessments because she was emotionally invested. He told her the truth and treated her as someone capable of handling it. She looked at him now and decided to give him the same. "I'm tired," she said. There are parts of this that haven't been felt yet because I haven't had time to feel them. My sister left me a voicemail, and I haven't been able to think about it properly because I can't afford to. I'm carrying more than I've let on, and tomorrow night is going to require everything I have." He was quiet. "And underneath all of that," she said, "I'm clear, I'm certain. I know exactly what I'm doing and why, and I would not do a single thing differently." She met his eyes. So, both things are true. He looked at her for a moment. Your sister's message, he said. Will it compromise tomorrow? No, she said. It will be there, but it won't compromise it. He nodded. There's something I want to say before tomorrow, he said. She waited. You came to me 22 days ago with a recording and a proposition, he said. You had every reason to be afraid, and you weren't. Or you were, and you moved anyway, which is rarer. He paused. What you've done since then, the intelligence, the Meridian dinner, the plan for tomorrow, I want you to understand that this is not the outcome of my operation. You are not an asset I managed. What happens tomorrow happens because you built it. She looked at him. Something in her chest shifted, not dramatically. Just settled the way things settle when they find the right place. You gave me the room to build it, she said. I gave you access, he said. You did the rest. She held his gaze for a moment. After tomorrow, she said. When this is over, what happens to the alliance? The question had been living in the back of her thinking for days, and she had finally said it out loud. He looked at her with the particular directness she had come to associate with him, answering something real. That depends on what you want, he said. What are my options? You could walk away, he said. With Bennett shipping secured, Daniel neutralized, and your reputation intact. The alliance was always contingent on the situation. If the situation resolves, the alliance resolves with it. She looked at him. And the other option, she said. He held her gaze. The other option, he said, is that you have spent 3 weeks demonstrating that you are one of the most strategically capable people I have encountered in a very long time, and I do not frequently encounter people like that. The room was very quiet. That's not an answer, she said. No, he said. It isn't. Because the answer is not mine to give alone. A pause. Tomorrow first. Everything else after. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Tomorrow first, she agreed. She stood to leave. At the door, she stopped. Alexander. He looked at her. When Daniel comes at me tomorrow, she said, and he will, I won't flinch. I know, he said. Not because I'm not afraid, because it's worth it. He looked at her with an expression she was still learning to read, something that lived in the space between recognition and something more. I know that too, he said. She left, and the next morning she put on the dress she had been saving for this, not the blue of the Meridian dinner, something different. Something that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the woman she had spent 23 days becoming. She looked at herself in the mirror. She was no longer the woman in the hallway. She was no longer the woman who had poured coffee in rooms where she was considered furniture. She was Sophia Bennett, and tonight, in front of every person in this city who mattered, Daniel Russo was going to find out exactly who that was. The Ellis Foundation benefit began at 7. Sophia arrived at 7:22, not late enough to be dramatic. She had never been interested in drama for its own sake, but late enough that the room had settled into itself, that the conversations were established, and the drinks were poured, and the social architecture of the evening was already in place. Late enough that when she walked in beside Alexander Russo for the second time in 8 days, there was no confusion about what people were seeing. This was not a coincidence. This was a statement. She felt the room shift the moment they crossed the threshold, that same wave of recalibrating attention she had felt at the Meridian dinner, but stronger this time. 8 days had passed. 8 days of Daniel talking, building his version of events, positioning himself as the aggrieved party in a story about a manipulated woman and a dangerous uncle. 8 days during which certain people in this room had heard his narrative, and were, she understood, watching tonight to see which version held. She kept her face calm and her posture easy, and she moved beside Alexander as if she had been doing it for years. She had worn deep red, not as a statement, or not only as a statement, because she had looked at herself in the mirror that morning and understood that the woman she was tonight was not performing anything. She was not managing an impression or calibrating a signal. She was simply herself in full, in a color she had always loved and never worn to events like this, because some part of her had always believed that being too visible was somehow impolite. She was done being polite. The first person to approach her was Helen Farrow, who had asked for a meeting after the Meridian dinner and whose expression tonight carried the specific warmth of a woman who had spent the intervening days thinking about what she'd seen and had come to a clear conclusion. "You look extraordinary," Helen said, not as a pleasantry as an observation. "Thank you," Sophia said. "I heard Daniel has been talking," Helen said, dropping her voice slightly, her eyes steady and direct. "He has," Sophia confirmed. "About you." "Yes." Helen looked at her with the expression of a woman who had navigated 60 years of powerful men, telling stories about the women who had outmaneuvered them. "Let him talk," she said. "I've seen what I've seen." She squeezed Sophia's arm briefly and moved on. Sophia filed it. She had been in the room for 6 minutes. The next 40 minutes were a kind of sustained performance of normalcy that required more discipline than anything she had done in the previous 23 days. She spoke to people. She accepted a drink she barely touched. She laughed at appropriate moments. She let Alexander handle the conversations that required his particular authority, and she handled the ones that required her particular access. The women who ran foundations, the business people, her father's company connected to the people who occupied the social layer just beneath the top tier, and who by virtue of being watchers rather than performers, often understood more than anyone else in the room. She was building something, and she had been building it for 23 days, and tonight was the night it either held or it didn't. She knew Daniel was in the room before she saw him. She knew because the quality of the attention around her shifted a subtle directional change, like a compass needle responding to something nearby. She tracked it without appearing to, and located him near the east side of the room, in a cluster of 3 men she recognized as being within his business circle. How was watching her. She did not look directly at him. She continued the conversation. She was in something about a maritime regulatory change affecting shipping lanes that the man in front of her was explaining with more enthusiasm than the topic warranted, and she listened and nodded and asked one precise question that made the man's face light up with the particular joy of someone who has found an unexpectedly engaged audience. She felt Daniel's gaze on her for 7 minutes. Then she heard his voice behind her. "Sophia." She turned. He was alone. He had extracted himself from the group he'd been standing with and crossed the room with the deliberate pace she recognized, controlled speed-managed affect. He was wearing the dark gray suit she had always thought looked best on him, and he had the expression of a man who had spent the past 24 hours preparing exactly what he was going to say. "Daniel," she said. He looked at her, then at Alexander, who was standing 4 feet away, engaged in a conversation, and who did not turn around. "Can we talk?" Daniel said. "Privately." "This seems fine," she said. His jaw moved slightly. "I'd prefer somewhere quieter." "I'd prefer here," she said. "Say what you want to say." He looked at her for a moment, assessing the way he always assessed the way she now recognized clearly as a form of management, and then something shifted in his face. The prepared version of this conversation she understood had assumed she would agree to somewhere quieter, somewhere the conversation could be shaped without witnesses. She had removed that option. He recalibrated. "I know you're angry," he said. "I understand why. But what's happened in the past week, Sophia, you've made choices that are going to affect both of us in ways you can't fully see yet. I need you to understand what you've walked into." "Tell me," she said pleasantly. "Alexander is using you," he said. "I know that's not what it feels like. He's very good at making people feel like partners when they're actually instruments. That's what he does. He identifies leverage, and he deploys it." He paused. "You are leverage, Sophia. To him, you are a tool for managing a family situation that he has allowed to fester for years because it served him to let me believe I had more independence than I did." She looked at him. "That's an interesting story," she said. "It's the truth." "It's a story," she said. "It's constructed very carefully to make me the naive party in every version of events. Your version has you as a frustrated heir who vented to the wrong person. My version has you as a man who spent 3 years planning to strip my family's company and destroy your uncle." She tilted her head slightly. I wonder which one the recording supports. His expression shifted. I've explained the recording. To other people, she said. You've explained it to other people. You haven't explained it to me because you know that I was standing in that hallway and I heard every word before I pressed record, and there is no context that changes what I heard. He stared at her. The composed exterior was still present, but it was working harder now. She could see the effort, the way a person can see the mechanism of a clock through the face when they know where to look. You're going to regret this, he said. His voice was still quiet, but something underneath it had an edge now. I've thought about that, she said. I might regret parts of it. The grief is real. 3 years was real, even if your end of it wasn't. She held his gaze directly. But I will never regret knowing the truth, and I will never regret making sure other people knew it too. What have you told people? He said. The edge was sharper now. What exactly have you said? Nothing yet, she said. Tonight is the first night I've said anything in public. You've been building something, he said. For weeks. I know you have. With Alexander. What is it? She looked at him, and then she said quietly, Ask Alexander. His eyes cut to Alexander, who had turned at some point in the last minute, and was now watching the conversation with the complete settled attention of a man who had been listening the whole time and had been waiting for exactly this moment. Daniel looked at his uncle. What have you done? Daniel said. And now the composure was genuinely eroding, not gone, not yet, but cracking at the edges in a way she could see clearly. Alexander walked the 4 feet toward them with measured steps. He stood beside Sophia, and the positioning was not accidental. He stood beside her, not in front of her, and that distinction she knew was visible to everyone in the room who was watching, which was most of them. I've done what I always do, Alexander said. I've protected what matters. You've weaponized my fiancé against me, Daniel said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last 2 words. Not with grief, but with fury, and the fury was beginning to be visible. Your former fiancé, Sophia said. Her voice was even and clear, and carried without her intending it to. And I was never weaponized. I walked in on my own 2 feet. Daniel looked at her. Something broke in his expression, not the composure that followed a moment later. What broke first was the story he had been telling himself. She could see it. The version where she was naive, where she was a tool, where she had been manipulated by a dangerous man into something she didn't understand. That version required her to be someone she was clearly, visibly, undeniably not. And looking at her now, he finally understood. He had never actually seen her. You set me up, he said. You set yourself up, she said. I just made sure there was a record. What happened next happened quickly, and the speed of it was precisely what she had predicted to Alexander 3 days earlier. Because Daniel, stripped of his narrative and standing in a room full of the people who mattered most to his ambitions, did what she had told Alexander he would do. He attacked, not physically. Daniel was too calculated for that, and too aware of the room. But he turned to the people nearest to them, a cluster of 6 or 7 who had drawn close in the particular way of people who understand they are witnessing something significant, and he addressed them directly. I want people in this room to understand what they're actually looking at, he said. His voice was loud now, carrying beyond the immediate cluster, and the radius of attentive silence expanded accordingly. My uncle has spent 20 years building a shadow network in this city. Every business in this room has at some point intersected with that network, whether they knew it or not. What he's doing now, using my fiancé as a vehicle to neutralize a family member who became inconvenient, is completely consistent with who he is and how he operates. The room had gone very quiet. She felt it, the full weight of the moment, all 23 days of it, pressing into this single point. She looked at Alexander beside her, and his face was absolutely still, which told her he had expected this, and had a response, and was waiting for the right moment. But she spoke first. May I say something, she said. Not to Daniel, to the room. The quiet deepened. She had their attention completely. I want to tell you something about what Daniel just said, she said. Her voice was clear and unhurried. He's right that Alexander Russo has operated in this city for 22 years. He's right that their network intersects with legitimate business. He's right that Alexander is capable of strategic thinking that extends beyond what most people can see. She paused. What he has left out is the reason I went to Alexander in the first place. Daniel's jaw tightened. Sophia, I went to him, she said, speaking over Daniel's voice without raising her own, because I was standing in a hallway outside Daniel's penthouse with wedding documents in my hands, and I heard my fiancé and my sister planning to dismantle my family's company from the inside. She looked around the room steadily. I heard him describe me as a stepping stone. I heard him outline in specific detail a plan to shift voting control of Bennett Shipping away from my father within 6 months of our marriage, and I heard him explain that I would be taken care of financially so that I wouldn't make noise. The room was absolutely silent. I recorded it, she said, because I was raised by a man who taught me that when you witness something important, you document it. She looked at Daniel. I went to Alexander because Daniel was planning to betray him too, because I had information that was relevant to both situations, and I understood that the only person positioned to stop the plan was the person it was designed to eventually destroy. She paused. I went because I had options, and I chose the one that protected my family and told the truth. Daniel stared at her. That's your version, he said. But his voice had lost something. The authority that had been behind it 3 minutes ago was gone. It's the recorded version, she said. Would you like to hear it? I have it here. She held up her phone. The room was so quiet, she could hear the ambient sound system in the distance, playing something soft and entirely inappropriate to the moment. Daniel looked at the phone. He looked at the room. He looked at Alexander, who was standing exactly where he had been standing, absolutely still, watching his nephew, with the expression of a man who had run out of patience not tonight, but long before tonight, and had simply been waiting for the accounting. This is not over, Daniel said. His voice was very low now. It is, Alexander said. Quiet. Final. 3 words with no performance in them whatsoever. Daniel stood in the silence of the room for a long moment, and then, because there was nothing else to do, because every angle had closed, and every story had collapsed, and the woman he had counted on to be invisible was standing in front of the city's most powerful gathering with a recording on her phone and a clarity in her eyes that made every word he had left feel worthless. He left. He walked out of the room. Nobody stopped him. Nobody followed. The door closed behind him. The silence held for 3 seconds after he left. Then the room began to breathe again. The particular exhalation of a crowd that has witnessed something and is beginning to process it. Conversations restarting in low tones. Heads turning toward each other with the shared expression of people recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Helen Farrow appeared at Sophia's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne and the expression of a woman who had waited a long time for an evening like this one. Drink this, she said. Sophia took the glass. Her hand was trembling slightly. Not visibly, she didn't think, but internally she could feel it. The adrenaline of the previous 6 minutes settling into her body, now that the performance was over, now that there was nothing left to hold herself steady for. She drank. Alexander was beside her. He said nothing, which was exactly right. There was nothing that needed saying in that moment, and he understood that. He simply stood there present, which was in its own way more steadying than words would have been. Several people approached in the next 10 minutes. Some to express support, some out of curiosity, some she noticed with the particular attention she had been honing for 23 days to recalibrate their relationship with her in light of what they had just witnessed, which was its own kind of information. She received all of it with grace and without exhilaration, because she had learned somewhere in the last 3 weeks that the moments you work toward are never quite what you imagine them to be. They're smaller and more human and more complicated. The resolution she had felt was real, but it lived alongside grief and exhaustion and the still unanswered questions about her sister and the still unknown territory of what came next. She was human. She felt all of it. At 9:45, George Bennett walked into the benefit. He had not been on the original guest list. She had not told him about tonight's plan, because she had not been certain until 48 hours ago that this was how it would unfold, and she had not wanted to place him in a room where his response to seeing his daughter face Daniel publicly might complicate things. But he was here now. He had come. She watched him scan the room and find her, and she watched his face do something complicated when he saw her standing beside Alexander. The conflict of a father navigating the distance between his instincts and his trust in the person his daughter had become. He crossed the room. He looked at Alexander first briefly, a look that carried 3 years of assumptions and 23 days of revised information, and then he looked at his daughter. "I heard what happened," he said. "Miriam called me." "I handled it," Sophia said. "I know you did." He paused. "I wanted to be here anyway." She looked at her father, at the man who had taught her to document, who had taught her to be thorough, who had spent 30 years building something and nearly lost it to a man who understood exactly how much it was worth, and she felt the grief she had been containing move through her quickly and cleanly, like something that needed to pass. "Dad," she said. "I know," he said. He put his hand on her shoulder. She let him. George Bennett looked at Alexander Russo. The two men regarded each other across a considerable distance of association and assumption. "Mr. Russo," her father said finally. "Mr. Bennett," Alexander said. A pause. "She came to you," her father said. "She did. And you helped her." "She helped herself," Alexander said. "I provided access." Her father looked at him for a long moment, with the scrutiny of a man who had spent 40 years reading people across negotiating tables and understood what he was seeing, even if it wasn't what he'd expected to see. Then he said, "I'd like to have the conversation with you, this week." Alexander nodded once. "I'll make the time." Her father looked at his daughter again. "You all right?" he said quietly. "I will be," she said. "I'm not yet, but I will be." He nodded because he was her father, and he understood the difference, and he trusted her to know it. The benefit wound down around 11. Sophia found herself in the final hour sitting in a quiet corner with Helen Farrow and 2 other women she had met properly for the first time tonight. Women who ran significant things and who had apparently been watching her from peripheral distances for years, and had decided in the aftermath of what the room had witnessed that she was someone worth knowing directly. They talked. Really talked about work, about the specific texture of being a woman who carried competence in contexts where it was often treated as decoration, about the cost of that, and the particular satisfaction of the moments when it couldn't be ignored. She was more open than she expected to be. Maybe it was the evening. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was 23 days of holding things very tightly, finally reaching a place where some of them could be set down. Helen walked her out at the end of the night. "What happens now?" Helen asked. Sophia thought about it. "I'm not entirely sure," she said. "The immediate situation is resolved. Daniel is finished in this city with the families in any position where he could still reach my father's company. That's done." "And you," Helen said. "What are you finished with, and what are you beginning?" It was a precise question. "I'm finished," Sophia said slowly, "with the version of myself that stayed small because it felt like courtesy." Helen looked at her. "And beginning?" Sophia thought about Alexander's words. The other option. The conversation they would have after tonight. The territory that had no map because she had never been here before, not in her professional life, not in anything. "Something I don't have a name for yet," she said honestly. Helen nodded, as if this were the most sensible answer she'd heard all evening. "Good," she said. "The things worth doing rarely arrive with names already attached." She hugged Sophia briefly and walked to her car. Sophia stood for a moment in the quiet. The night air was cold, and she had not brought a coat. Another small decision that felt in retrospect like a metaphor she was too tired to fully unpack. She had walked into this evening carrying nothing she didn't need, and she was walking out the same way. Alexander came to stand beside her. He had appeared from the direction of the entrance without announcing himself, which was simply how he moved through the world, and she had long since stopped being startled by it. They stood in the quiet for a moment without speaking. "How are you?" he said. "Tired," she said. "Really tired, and lighter than I expected." "It's over," he said. "This part," she said. "Yes, this part." She turned to look at him. He won't let it go completely. Men like Daniel don't. No, Alexander agreed. But his ability to act on it is gone. He has no backing, no leverage, no story that holds. He can be angry for as long as he wants. That's all he can do. She nodded. My father wants to meet with you, she said. I know, it'll be a difficult conversation. He's a fair man, she said. He'll hear you. I know that too, Alexander said. A pause. He raised you. Fair reasoning runs in the family. She looked at him with the expression that was by now a kind of private communication between them, the one that meant she had clocked what he'd said and was filing it. There's something I need to do tomorrow, she said, that I've been putting off. He waited. My sister, she said. Yes. I need to see her. I've been carrying that locked up for 3 weeks and it needs to open. She paused. I don't know what I'm going to say to her yet. I don't know what there is to say. You'll know when you're there, Alexander said. She looked at him. Is that something you actually believe or something you're saying to be reassuring? I don't say things to be reassuring, he said. You know that by now. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. I know that, she said. They stood in the quiet a moment longer. What you said tonight, Alexander said. In the room, when you spoke to everyone. What about it? You didn't need to do it the way you did. You could have been sharper, more cutting. You had the room, you could have dismantled him completely. She thought about it. I know, she said. You chose not to. I chose to tell the truth, she said. Cleanly, without more than it needed. She paused. He did enough damage to himself. I didn't need to add to it. Alexander was quiet for a moment. That's a distinction that matters, he said, and in his voice was something she had learned to recognize over 23 days as the closest thing he came to genuine admiration. She looked at him. Alexander, she said, the conversation you said we'd have after tonight. Yes, I'd like to have it soon. He looked at her. Tomorrow, he said, if you're ready. I'll be ready, she said. She held his gaze for a moment. This man she had walked into a room to find 23 days ago. This man who had looked at her recording and her proposition and her absolute refusal to be naive about what she was proposing and had said yes. This man who had not once in 23 days told her what she wanted to hear or treated her as someone who needed managing. Good night, Alexander, she said. Good night, Sophia, he said. She got into the car. And as the driver pulled away from the benefit and the city opened up around her in its familiar constellations of light and movement, she felt beneath the exhaustion and the grief and the complicated territory of tomorrow. Something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like herself. Not the self she had performed for 3 years. Not the self that poured coffee and stayed quiet and mistook accommodation for devotion. Her actual self. The woman who had stood in a hallway and pressed record. The woman who had walked into the most dangerous room in the city and made a proposition. The woman who had stood in front of everyone who mattered tonight and told the truth without flinching. She looked out the window at the city moving past. There was still Amelia to face. There was still the conversation with Alexander tomorrow, the one that had no map. There was still her father to protect and a company to secure. And all the territory that came after the resolution of the thing you had been building toward. There was still everything that came next. But tonight, she let herself simply be in the car, moving through the city, finished with one chapter of her life so completely and so finally that she could feel the page turn. She was ready for the next one. She slept for 9 hours. Not because the night had resolved everything it hadn't, and she knew it. But because her body finally collected the debt that 23 days of sustained performance had accumulated, and when she lay down after the benefit, she was simply gone. No dreams she could remember. No waking at 2 in the morning with her mind already running. Just 9 hours of dark, complete rest, the kind that only comes when something that has been held very tightly is finally allowed to release. She woke to 3 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, one from her father, and a text from Alexander that said simply, "Whenever you're ready. No rush today." She read that last part twice, No rush today. From a man who had operated for 22 years with the precision of someone for whom time was always a factor. The phrase carried a specific weight. She understood it as a form of care, not the performed, managed kind she had learned to recognize and distrust, but something quieter. The care of a person who understood that the morning after a significant thing requires space. She made coffee. She stood at the window and watched the city doing what it always did. Moving, generating its constant ambient noise of ambition and effort, and she let herself be still inside it for a little while. Then she called Amelia. Her sister answered on the second ring, which told Sophia she had been waiting. Sophia. Amelia's voice was careful. The kind of careful that comes from not knowing whether the person on the other end of the line has called to forgive or to finish something. I got your voicemail, Sophia said. Silence. I've listened to it 3 times, Sophia said. I want to see you, today if you can. A sharp intake of breath. Yes, of course, yes. My apartment, noon. I'll be there, Amelia said. Then quietly, Sophia. Noon, Sophia said gently. We'll talk then. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand and felt the locked door inside her swing open on its own, the way things open when you stop bracing against them. She had 2 hours. She used them. She called her father, who answered immediately, and who, had she could tell from the quality of his voice, also not slept much. How are you feeling? He asked. Human, she said, which is an improvement. He laughed short, relieved. Last night was... I know. You were... He paused. She could hear him searching for the word, and not quite finding one that was sufficient. Your mother would have been extraordinary to watch last night, he said finally. But I think you were better. She felt that in her chest, clean and sharp and deeply real. Don't make me cry before noon, Dad, she said. He laughed again. The meeting with Russo, he said. I meant what I said last night. I know, he knows too. He said it'll be a difficult conversation. He's right about that, her father said. But difficult and impossible aren't the same thing. A pause. Is this something I should be worried about? Not the business. You. Is he someone I should be worried about? She thought about how to answer that. He's someone who told me the truth every single time I needed it, she said. In 23 days, he never once managed me or positioned me or told me something because he thought it was what I wanted to hear. Her father was quiet. That's not a small thing, he said. No, she said. It isn't. Another pause. All right, her father said. I'll keep my door open. That's all I'm asking, she said. Amelia arrived at 11:58. Sophia heard the knock and stood at the door for exactly 2 seconds before she opened it, and what she saw on the other side stopped something in her mid-chest. Her sister looked like she had not slept in 3 days. Amelia was 31 years old and had always been the kind of beautiful that looked effortless, bright eyes, easy smile, the particular warmth that made people want to be near her. Tonight, or this noon, this gray November noon, she looked like someone who had been standing inside a storm of her own making and had recently run out of the energy to pretend she wasn't getting wet. Her eyes were red, not freshly, but the kind of chronically red that comes from intermittent crying spread over many days. She looked at Sophia. She didn't say anything. Sophia stepped back and held the door open. Amelia came in. They sat at the kitchen table, not the living room, not anywhere more comfortable or more staged. The kitchen table where they had done homework together as children and argued over cereal choices and sat through difficult family conversations their whole lives. Sophia had chosen it deliberately because what needed to happen here required honesty, and the kitchen table was where honesty lived in their family. She made tea. Amelia wrapped her hands around the mug without drinking. The silence between them had texture. Not hostile, something more complicated. The silence of 2 people who love each other and have hurt each other and are trying to find the entry point of a conversation that has been waiting for 3 weeks. Sophia went first. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to answer it honestly. Not the way you think I want it answered. Actually, honestly. Amelia looked at her. Okay. When did it start with Daniel? Amelia's jaw tightened briefly. 18 months ago. Sophia absorbed that. 18, 18 months of Sunday dinners and family holidays and birthday calls, and 100 ordinary interactions, during which her sister had been carrying that. Had sat across tables from her, and laughed at the right moments, and asked about the wedding, and hugged her, and said I love you. Did you love him? Sophia asked. The question cost her something to ask. She paid it. Amelia's eyes filled. I thought I did, she said. I thought he made me feel like I was the person he actually chose, the one he actually wanted. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I know how that sounds. It sounds like exactly what he wanted you to feel, Sophia said. Amelia looked at her. He does that, Sophia said. He finds what a person needs most, and he provides just enough of it to keep them useful. With me, it was being seen as capable and serious. With you, it was, she paused, being chosen, above me. Amelia flinched. Yes, she said quietly, above you. The words landed in the room like something that required a moment to settle. I've been your older sister my whole life, Sophia said. I've been the capable one, the responsible one, the one who had things together. I know what that felt like from where you were standing. I'm not saying it excuses anything, but I know it wasn't nothing. Amelia looked at her with an expression that was trying to hold too many things at once. When did you know what he was really planning? Sophia asked. 3 months ago, Amelia said. Her voice was very quiet. He told me about the company, about the board, about your father. She stopped. He said it like it was obviously the right thing, like it was just business and everyone would be fine and you'd be taken care of, and She stopped again. I didn't say anything. I didn't stop him. I told myself it wasn't as bad as it sounded. But you knew, Sophia said. I knew, Amelia said. The silence held. Why didn't you tell me? The question was the simplest one, and the hardest one simultaneously. Amelia looked at her hands around the mug. Because telling you would have meant losing him, she said. And I chose him. She looked up. Her eyes were direct now, through the tears more honest than Sophia had seen her in a long time. I chose him over you, Sophia. I can say it. I need to say it. I chose him over my own sister, and I knew it was wrong from the beginning, and I did it anyway. The room was very quiet. Sophia sat with that. Not with anger. The anger had burned through 3 weeks ago and left something cleaner behind. Not with the urge to absolve her sister of it either, because that would be its own form of dishonesty. She sat with it as what it was, a true thing said plainly by someone who had finally stopped managing it. I know, Sophia said. I'm sorry, Amelia said. The words came out thick, compressed. I know that's not enough. I know I can't undo any of it. I know the wedding and watching you plan it and sitting there knowing what was going to happen. I know what that makes me. What do you think it makes you? Sophia asked. Amelia looked at her. A coward, she said. And a terrible sister. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. It makes you someone who made bad choices for understandable reasons, she said finally. That's not the same as being fundamentally bad. But it's also not something I can just absorb and move past like it didn't happen. I know. I don't know what we look like after this, Sophia said. I'm not going to tell you we're fine because we're not fine yet. And I'm not going to promise you a timeline. Amelia nodded. The tears had spilled now, running quietly. But I'm not going to lose my sister over a man who didn't deserve either of us, Sophia said. That's not a resolution. That's just letting him take more than he already took. Amelia looked at her. I'm going to need time, Sophia said. And I'm going to need honesty. Not the version of honesty where you tell me what you think I can handle. Real honesty. Can you do that? Yes, Amelia said. And meant it. Sophia could hear the difference between a word said to manage and a word said to commit. Okay, Sophia said. She reached across the table and put her hand briefly over her sister's. Not a forgiveness. Not a restoration of everything to the way it was before. Something more honest The acknowledgement that two people who have loved each other for 31 years are still in the room together, still trying, still reaching across the table, even when the table has been damaged. That was enough for today. It was more than enough. Amelia left at 2. Sophia sat at the kitchen table for 10 minutes after she heard the elevator close, letting the conversation settle into its proper place. Then she texted Alexander, "Ready when you are." He replied within 2 minutes with an address she recognized, the first location, his private club where she had walked in 23 days ago with a recording and a proposition and a steadiness she had not entirely felt but had chosen to perform until it became real. She arrived at 4. Howe was sitting this time at the long table, the same seat he had taken at their first meeting. There were 2 cups of coffee on the table, which told her he had timed her arrival. She noticed that. She filed it. She sat across from him. They looked at each other. "How was this morning?" he asked. "Hard," she said. "Real. Better than I expected, and harder than I expected simultaneously." "And your sister?" "We have a long way to go," she said. "But we started." She paused. "That's more than I thought I'd be able to say yesterday." He nodded. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "You said we'd have a conversation today." "Yes." "Then let's have it." He looked at her steadily. "I want to propose something to you," he said. "And I want you to hear it completely before you respond, because the immediate reaction and the considered reaction might be different, and I'd rather have the considered one." "Go ahead," she said. "Bennett Shipping has a problem," he said. "Not a crisis, the crisis has been averted, but a structural problem that existed before Daniel and will exist after him. Your father built a strong company, and he built it with his own instincts, and those instincts are excellent. But he built it in an era where the international frameworks that shipping depends on were relatively stable, and those frameworks are changing faster than any single operator can track alone." She was listening carefully. "I have infrastructure," he said. "Not the kind that goes in annual reports, but infrastructure that connects to every significant port corridor on 3 continents. Intelligence about regulatory shifts, about which relationships are moving, and which are calcifying, about where the next decade of international trade is actually going, rather than where the conventional analysis says it's going." He paused. "Your company and my infrastructure together represent something that neither of us can build independently. You're proposing a formal business partnership," she said. "Yes." "Between Bennett Shipping and the Russo Network." "Between Bennett Shipping and specific legitimate interests I can bring to the table," he said. "Structured properly, transparently enough that your father can be fully informed and make a real decision." She sat with that. "My father will have questions," she said. "I expect significant questions," Alexander said. "I will answer them honestly. Everyone. Some of what you do. Some of what I do exists in areas your father will find uncomfortable," he said directly. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise or minimize it. The offer is real, and the risks are real, and he deserves to understand both." She looked at him. "That's either the most straightforward thing anyone in your position has ever said," she said, "or it's the most sophisticated form of persuasion I've ever encountered." "It could be both," he said. And the corner of his mouth moved barely, almost imperceptibly, in a way she had come to recognize over 23 days as the closest thing he permitted himself to a smile. "It could," she agreed. She was quiet for a moment. "You said yesterday," she said, "that the other option after this was over was that I had demonstrated something to you, strategically." "Yes." "What exactly are you proposing for me specifically?" she said. "Not for the company, for me." He held her gaze. "I'm proposing that you stop operating as a background resource," he said, "and start operating at the level you're actually capable of, formally, with authority and with compensation and with access to everything I have that's relevant to what we're building." "You want me at the table," she said. "I want you at the table," he confirmed. "Not as a representative of Bennett Shipping, not as a liaison, as a partner in your own right." The room was very quiet. She had prepared herself in the back of her mind for various versions of this conversation. She had thought about what she would say if the offer was purely transactional, a formalization of what they had been doing for 23 days. She had thought about what she would say if the offer was something else, something more personal, and therefore more complicated. She had not quite prepared herself for this specific thing, for being offered clearly and directly the thing she had never been offered before. Full visibility, full authority. The table itself, not the space adjacent to it. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course." "Not because I'm uncertain about the work," she said. "Because I want to understand exactly what I'm saying yes to before I say it. That's not hesitation, that's precision." "I know the difference," he said. She looked at him across the table. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "What is this?" she said. "Not the business. This." She indicated the space between them with a slight gesture. "Because 23 days ago I walked in here as a stranger with a recording and an ask. And now we're sitting here talking about partnership in both directions, and I need to know what I'm actually navigating." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of avoidance. She had learned to distinguish his silences. This was the quiet man choosing words with the care he gave everything. "I don't perform things," he said finally. "You know that. I know that. I don't tell people what I want them to hear. I know that too. Then you know," he said, "that when I say you are one of the most remarkable people I have encountered in a very long time, I'm not saying it to move you toward a decision. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you deserve to hear things that are true." She looked at him. "And the rest of it," she said. "The rest of it," he said, "is something I'd like the time to find out, if you would." A pause. "I am 61 years old. I have spent most of my life being very certain about most things. You are one of very few things I have encountered in a long time that I am not entirely certain about." "That's not a confession of feeling," she said. "That's an admission of uncertainty." "From me," he said. "Those are the same thing." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "Give me a week." "For the business question or the other question?" "Both," she said. "Give me a week to think clearly without adrenaline in the way, and then I'll give you a real answer." He nodded. "1 week," he said. The week that followed was the quietest 7 days she had experienced in longer than she could remember, which was itself a kind of answer. She met with her father and walked him through the details of Alexander's proposal fully, without softening the parts that were complicated, the same way Alexander had said he would present it. Her father asked hard questions, and she answered them honestly, and at the end of 2 hours, he sat back in his chair and looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who was processing something that was larger than he had space for yet. "I need time," he said. "Take it," she said. "This isn't urgent. Take the time you need." "Does he know that?" her father said. "That I'll need time?" "He told me to tell you to take as much as you need," she said. His exact words were, "A man who built something real doesn't make decisions about it quickly, and he shouldn't." Her father looked at her. "He said that." "He did." Her father was quiet. "I'll have questions," he said finally. "A lot of them." "He'll answer them," she said. "Everyone, honestly." Another long silence. "Okay," her father said. It was not a yes, but it was a door. She received in the same week 3 separate professional inquiries, 2 from companies in Helen Farrow's network, who had heard about her management of the Bennett shipping situation, and wanted to discuss consulting arrangements, and 1 from a corporate governance firm that had learned through channels she could trace directly back to the Meridian dinner that she had a particular skill set they were looking for. She responded to all 3. Not to accept, not yet, but to have the conversations. To see what the landscape looked like from this new vantage point. She talked to Amelia twice. Short conversations, careful ones, the kind that were doing the slow and necessary work of rebuilding something load-bearing. Amelia was different in both calls, less performed, less bright without substance. Raw in a way that was uncomfortable and honest, and ultimately more like the sister Sophia remembered from before the years when they had both in their different ways started performing versions of themselves for each other. On the 4th day, she heard through the kind of information network she was learning to read that Daniel Russo had left the city, not fled. There was nothing criminal attaching to him, nothing that law enforcement was pursuing. He had simply concluded with the particular clarity of a man whose every angle had closed simultaneously that staying was not viable. The business community had recalibrated. The families had recalibrated. The story that the room had witnessed at the Ellis Foundation benefit was the story, and no counter-narrative he built would outlast it. He was gone. She sat with that information for a moment. She had expected to feel something more dramatic at the news. Some version of completion or satisfaction, or the particular release of knowing that a threat had removed itself. What she felt instead was quieter. Something close to sad in the way that the end of any real thing carries sadness even when the ending is right. She had loved him, not the person he actually was. She understood that now with the clean clarity of someone who has had enough time and enough distance to see the shape of a thing. She had loved the person he had constructed for her to love. But she had loved that construction genuinely, with her whole heart for 3 years. That was real. The grief was allowed to be real. She gave herself one afternoon to feel it fully sitting in her apartment, with the kind of deliberate stillness she had not allowed herself in 23 days of movement and strategy and sustained performance. She let it move through her. The loss of 3 years. The loss of the future she had thought she was building. The loss of a version of her sister she had believed in. The loss of the naivete that had allowed her to live inside all of it without seeing what was actually happening. She grieved it. And when the afternoon was over, she got up. She made dinner. She called her father. She worked. On the 7th day, she went to Alexander. Not to his club, she suggested somewhere different. A small restaurant she knew in the Whitmore district, where the tables were far apart, and the lighting was warm, and the owner recognized her father and would give them a corner without asking why they needed one. He was already there when she arrived. She sat down. He looked at her, taking in. She thought whatever the 7 days had done to her face, the particular quality of someone who has processed something and come out the other side. "You look rested," he said. "I slept," she said. "More than I have in a month." "Good." She picked up the menu, looked at it, set it down. She wasn't here for the food. "The business proposal," she said. "Yes. My father is open to a conversation. Not a yes, an actual conversation with full information, with his lawyers present, with time to think clearly. He has conditions and questions, and he will present them directly." "I expected nothing less," Alexander said. "And his conditions will not be negotiable on the core points," she said. "He will not surrender governance. He will not accept any arrangement that reduces his visibility into how the partnership operates. He will have an exit clause. Those are reasonable conditions," Alexander said without hesitation. "I know," she said. "I told him you'd say that." He looked at her. "The second part," she said. He waited. She had spent 7 days thinking about this. Not obsessively, not continuously, but with the steady background attention she gave to things that mattered. She had thought about what she knew of him, what she had seen, what had surprised her, because the things that surprised her were always the most reliable information. What surprised her was the consistency. 23 days of consistency. Not warmth, he was not, and would probably never be, a conventionally warm man, and she had no interest in pretending he was. But honesty, directness, the refusal to manage her, or position her, or treat her competence as something that needed to be carefully handled rather than simply met. What surprised her was that she had felt in 23 of the strangest days of her life more fully like herself than she had in the 3 years preceding them. That was information. "I'm not a person who moves quickly toward things," she said. "Not in my work, and not in anything else. I am deliberate. That's not going to change." "I don't want it to," he said. "And I'm not going to perform certainty I don't have," she said. "Whatever this is, whatever it might become, I need it to be honest at every stage, including the stages where neither of us knows yet." "That's the only version I'd accept," he said. She looked at him. "Then yes," she said. "To the table. To finding out what the rest of it is." He held her gaze. In the quiet of the restaurant, in the warm light of a November evening, she watched something cross his face that she had not seen before, not in 23 days of meetings and strategy, and the particular intensity of a shared purpose. Something that was not calculation or assessment or the managed authority he carried through every room. Something that was simply human. "All right," he said. She picked up her menu. He picked up his. They ordered dinner. They talked not about strategy or the business proposal or the landscape of what came next. They talked the way people talk when they are beginning to learn each other properly, the kind of conversation that is simultaneously about everything and nothing and is building something underneath the surface that neither party comments on directly. She learned things about him she had not known. He asked her things no one had asked in years. The evening moved at its own pace. When they finally left, standing briefly in the cold outside the restaurant before their respective cars arrived, he looked at her with an expression she was learning to read as his version of openness, the particular quality of a man who did not often allow himself to be seen and was choosing carefully to allow it now. "The woman who walked into my club 23 days ago," he said, "came alone, with a recording, and made the most direct proposition I had received in a decade." "I remember," she said. "I want you to know," he said, "that I have worked alongside a considerable number of capable people in my life, in all the ways that word applies." He paused. "You are the most complete." She looked at him. She thought about the hallway, the recording, the cream-colored binder, the 4 days of preparation, the night she had walked into his club, carrying everything she had. She thought about the woman she had been before that night, and the woman she was standing in this cold November air, and the distance between them was not the distance of transformation. She had not become someone new. She had become someone old, someone who had always existed and had spent a long time being quiet about it. "I know," she said. Not arrogance, just clarity. Just the woman who had finally decided to take up exactly as much space as she actually occupied. His car arrived first. He looked at her before he got in. "Next week," he said. "Next week," she confirmed. She watched him leave. Then she stood for a moment in the cold no-coat, the same as the night of the benefit, which she was now fully prepared to accept as a personal pattern, and she looked at the city. The same city she had driven through 23 days ago with a recording on her phone and a decision made and everything uncertain ahead of her. The same lights, the same noise, the same ambient hum of ambition and effort that never entirely stopped. Everything was different. Not because Daniel was gone. Not because the plan had worked. Not because she was standing in the orbit of one of the most powerful men in the city and had been offered the table she had never been given. Everything was different because she was different. Not changed, clarified. The grief was real and would continue to be real, and she would not pretend otherwise. Her sister was a work in progress, and so was she, and so were all of the complicated relationships that had been disturbed by 23 days of truth-telling and would need to be rebuilt with new foundations. Her father was still processing. The business was still evolving. The territory ahead had no map. None of that had resolved. But Sophia Bennett was standing in the cold outside a restaurant in November, knowing exactly who she was, knowing exactly what she was capable of knowing, that she would never again mistake accommodation for love or silence, for grace or invisibility for courtesy. She had walked into the most dangerous room in the city, carrying a recording and a truth, and asked to be taken seriously. And the world had obliged. She put her hands in her pockets. She called her car. She went home. And the woman who had once stood in a hallway with a wedding binder and every reason to fall apart, the woman who had pressed record instead of crying, who had walked toward danger instead of away from it, who had chosen truth over comfort at every single moment. It mattered that woman did not look back. Not because what was behind her didn't matter, because what was ahead of her finally did.